Escondí a una Chica Apache en Secreto, Ahora Debo Hijo. It all began on a quiet evening when the sun was just starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The town where he lived was small, the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names and secrets rarely stayed hidden for long. He had spent most of his life there, following a simple routine: work during the day, return home, and spend the evening in the calm of his own house. That evening, though, something unexpected happened, something that would change his life in ways he could never have imagined. He had gone out for a short walk after dinner, just to clear his mind. The streets were almost empty, and the air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine trees from the hills nearby. As he walked past an abandoned building at the edge of town, he noticed a figure huddled near the doorway. At first, he thought it was just a stray animal seeking warmth. But as he came closer, he realized it was a person, a young woman. She looked cold and frightened, her clothes worn and dusty, and her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and relief. He stopped a few steps away, unsure what to do. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. The woman flinched at the sound of his voice, pressing herself against the wall as if trying to disappear. She didn't answer. He could see she was scared, probably because she didn't know if he was a threat or not, but something about her made him hesitate. He didn't feel danger, he felt the weight of someone who needed help. "I won't hurt you," he said softly, keeping his voice calm. "If you need a place to stay for the night, I can help." The woman's eyes searched his face. For a moment it seemed like she wanted to run, but then she slowly shook her head, almost imperceptibly, and allowed him to step closer. She didn't speak a word, but he noticed she had a small bag with a few personal belongings. She looked like she had been traveling for a long time, trying to escape something he couldn't yet understand. Her silence made him realize how alone she must have felt, and it stirred something in him, a mix of sympathy and responsibility. Without asking too many questions, he offered her his arm and guided her to his car. She hesitated at first, but then allowed him to help her inside. The drive back to his house was quiet, filled only with the hum of the engine. He could see her glancing out the window occasionally, her face reflecting the fading light outside. He didn't press her for details. He knew she would open up when she was ready. For now, she just needed safety, and he was determined to provide it. When they arrived at his home, he showed her to a small guest room he had kept for visitors. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and warm. She looked around the room, taking in the simple furniture, and finally she allowed herself to sit on the edge of the bed. He could see her shoulders relax slightly, though the tension in her face didn't fully disappear. She was still wary, still afraid, but she had made it this far, and he hoped that meant she trusted him enough to stay. He brought her a cup of warm tea, hoping it would help her feel more comfortable. She took it silently, her hands trembling slightly as she held the cup. He noticed the subtle details, the way her fingers gripped the cup tightly, the way her eyes darted around the room as if expecting something bad to happen at any moment. It was clear she had been through hardships, more than he could imagine. Yet despite all that, there was a quiet strength in her posture, a resilience that spoke of someone who had survived many challenges and wasn't ready to give up. Over the next few hours, they didn't speak much. Words weren't necessary. She settled into the room, occasionally glancing at him with cautious curiosity. He, in turn, respected her silence. He understood that trust couldn't be rushed. Offering help was one thing, earning trust was another. He didn't want to force her to share more than she was ready to. For now, he just made sure she was safe, that she had food, warmth, and a place to rest. As night fell, he noticed her looking out the window at the stars. There was a moment when she seemed lost in thought, a shadow of sadness crossing her face. He didn't interrupt. Instead, he quietly prepared a small dinner for both of them, hoping that sharing a meal might create a sense of normalcy. She ate slowly, her movements careful, almost as if she were studying him as much as she was eating. There was a fragile connection forming, a silent understanding that they were both navigating a delicate situation together. Days passed, and the routine settled in. He gave her space to adjust, providing meals and basic comforts while allowing her to maintain her independence. She didn't speak much about her past, only hinting at difficulties she had faced. He respected that. He didn't press, but he observed, learning to understand her moods, her habits, and the subtle ways she expressed herself. Slowly, the tension in the house began to ease. She started to smile occasionally, small gestures of gratitude appearing in her eyes. And in return, he felt a growing sense of responsibility, a desire to protect her beyond simple kindness. One evening, while they were sitting together in the living room, she finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, almost hesitant, but it carried weight. "Thank you for letting me stay," she said. It was simple yet powerful. Those words carried more meaning than any grand speech could. He nodded, offering a small smile, and said, "You're welcome, you're safe here." It was the first real conversation they had, and it set the tone for what was to come. They began to share small details about their lives, their experiences, and their perspectives. He learned that she had traveled far, leaving behind people and places that had once been important to her. She learned that he had lived a quiet life, devoted to work and community, and that his decision to help her was not impulsive but thoughtful. Through these exchanges, trust started to grow, fragile but real. Yet, despite the growing comfort, there was always an undercurrent of tension. She was cautious, never fully revealing herself, and he was careful, aware that his actions had consequences. Keeping her presence secret meant constant vigilance, closing blinds, avoiding visitors, and carefully navigating social interactions. But it also meant that they were sharing a unique experience, one that required mutual respect and understanding. And slowly, the unspoken bond between them grew stronger, built on empathy, patience, and the quiet acknowledgement of each other's struggles. One night, as he checked the locks and made sure everything was secure, he paused and reflected on the events that had brought them together. It was unusual, unexpected, and yet it felt almost fated. He didn't fully understand the path ahead, nor did he know what challenges would arise. But he knew one thing: for now she was safe, and that mattered more than anything else. And so, life continued in quiet secrecy, a delicate balance between trust and caution, fear and hope. Each day brought small victories, smiles, shared meals, and moments of understanding. And although neither of them could foresee the future, they both knew that their lives had changed forever the moment she stepped into his life that quiet evening, under the fading light of the setting sun. Days turned into weeks, and life in the small house settled into a quiet routine. The young woman had started to adapt to her new environment, though she remained cautious. She moved carefully through the rooms, always aware of the possibility that someone might discover her. For the man, it was a constant challenge to balance everyday life with the need to keep her presence secret. Every knock on the door or unexpected visitor caused a moment of panic, a reminder that the world outside could never know what he had hidden inside. He had grown accustomed to the careful planning it required, locking windows before leaving the house, ensuring that neighbors never saw strange faces lingering too long, and always thinking twice before making phone calls or running errands. Yet despite the tension, there was a comfort in having her nearby. The house, once silent and routine, now had life and movement. He noticed small things: the way she arranged her corner of the room, how she hummed quietly while doing chores, and the occasional soft laugh when a moment of humor slipped through the walls of caution. The woman, for her part, began to show signs of trust. At first she had barely spoken, but slowly her words started to come out, almost like drops of water in a quiet stream. She would share small details about her day or ask questions about the town and its people. He noticed that she seemed particularly interested in the plants in his garden, often asking about their names or how he cared for them. These conversations were brief, simple, and sometimes awkward, but they became a bridge between two people who had come together under unusual circumstances. One afternoon, while she was sitting by the window, he joined her quietly, offering a cup of tea. She accepted it with a shy smile. They didn't speak at first, just enjoying the calm of the afternoon. The sun streamed through the glass, casting a golden glow over the room, and for a moment it felt like the outside world had disappeared. Then, in a soft voice, she began to talk about her travels, about the small villages she had passed through and the people she had met. She spoke carefully, avoiding too many personal details, but it was clear she had experienced hardship. He listened attentively, realizing that the silence he had once respected was now slowly giving way to shared stories. Even though trust was growing, the fear of discovery never fully left them. Each day was a delicate balance. He would go to the market, always aware that someone might notice something unusual, and she would remain inside, quietly moving around the house. They developed signals, small nods, gestures, or glances, that allowed them to communicate without speaking, especially when someone approached the door or window. These silent exchanges were filled with unspoken understanding, a way of navigating the constant tension without letting it overwhelm them. Life in secrecy also brought moments of frustration. She sometimes felt trapped, longing to step outside without fear. He saw the restlessness in her eyes and struggled with the knowledge that he was both protector and warden. He tried to explain gently that it was for her safety, that the outside world held dangers she could not yet face. She would nod, but the longing never disappeared. There were nights when he heard her walking quietly through the room, looking out the window at the stars, and he knew she was imagining freedom and possibility beyond the walls he had built for her protection. Despite these challenges, small routines began to develop. They cooked together sometimes, sharing simple meals like rice, beans, and bread. She learned the habits of the household, and he learned more about her preferences, her quiet ways of expressing gratitude, and her occasional bursts of humor. One evening, as they shared a simple dinner, she laughed at something he had said. It was a soft, musical laugh, and he realized that this moment, small and ordinary, was extraordinary in the context of their situation. It was a sign that the walls of fear were slowly giving way to trust and comfort. At times, they would sit in the living room in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. He would observe her quietly, the way she folded her hands in her lap, how her eyes reflected the light of the lamp, and the subtle movements that hinted at emotions she did not speak aloud. He began to notice how much he had come to rely on her presence, how her quiet companionship had filled a void he hadn't fully acknowledged before. It was strange, unexpected, and yet undeniable. One evening, she spoke more openly than before. "I used to walk for miles every day," she said softly, her voice carrying a hint of nostalgia. "I never stayed in one place for long, and now I don't know how to stay still." He nodded, understanding that her sense of freedom had been deeply rooted in movement and independence. He did not try to force her to explain further. Instead, he simply acknowledged her words and offered comfort through his quiet presence. It was a delicate act, allowing her to express herself without judgment or pressure. Days stretched into weeks, and the bond between them grew stronger, though it remained unspoken. She began to trust him more, letting small gestures of closeness emerge naturally. Sometimes she would offer a gentle smile when he brought her tea or bread, or she would hum quietly while working in the kitchen. These small acts were powerful, creating a sense of connection and familiarity that neither had experienced before. For him, it was a lesson in patience, in understanding that trust could not be rushed or forced. It had to be earned, nurtured slowly over time. Yet, even with growing trust, the reality of secrecy weighed heavily. Every unexpected sound outside, every knock on the door, reminded them that their world was fragile. He often found himself imagining worst-case scenarios, wondering what he would do if someone discovered her presence. She, in turn, sometimes seemed lost in thought, as if calculating risks and possibilities. There was a shared understanding that this arrangement, though necessary, was not permanent. It was a temporary shelter, a fragile sanctuary in a world that could be harsh and unforgiving. In these moments of tension, they learned to rely on each other. She learned that he could be trusted to protect her, to respect her boundaries, and to offer support without judgment. He learned that she had resilience, intelligence, and strength far beyond what he had first assumed. Each challenge they faced together, whether it was avoiding a curious neighbor, handling unexpected visitors, or navigating the quiet tension of everyday life, brought them closer, creating a bond that was more than convenience or duty. It was a bond built on mutual respect and understanding. One afternoon, as he returned from a quick trip to the market, he found her sitting by the window with a small notebook. She was writing carefully, almost as if afraid to make a mistake. He didn't interrupt, realizing that this was her way of processing the world, of making sense of the chaos she had left behind. When she looked up, she showed him a drawing she had made, a simple sketch of the house, with trees and flowers outside. It was innocent and hopeful, a reminder that even in secrecy there was room for creativity, for small expressions of beauty and life. Life continued in this quiet, fragile rhythm. There were moments of laughter, moments of tension, and moments of reflection. They began to understand each other in ways that went beyond words, through gestures, glances, and shared experiences. He came to appreciate her presence not just as someone he was protecting, but as a person whose life had value and whose experiences mattered. She came to see him not just as a host, but as someone she could trust, someone who offered stability and safety in a world that had often been uncertain and dangerous. And yet, beneath the growing comfort, there was always an undercurrent of awareness, an understanding that their situation could not last forever. They both knew that challenges lay ahead, that decisions would have to be made, and that the world outside would eventually demand answers. But for now, they allowed themselves to exist in the small bubble they had created, cherishing moments of peace, connection, and understanding. As night fell over the small town, they sat together in the quiet living room. The house was warm, the air calm, and the faint sound of crickets drifted through the open window. He watched her for a moment, noticing the softness in her expression, the way she seemed almost at ease in this temporary sanctuary. It was a fragile piece, but it was real. And in that moment, he realized that what had started as a simple act of kindness, offering shelter to someone in need, had grown into something far more complex. It was the beginning of a relationship built on trust, respect, and the unspoken understanding that they were navigating an extraordinary situation together. The quiet rhythm of their secret life continued for weeks, but the air in the house had begun to change. There was a subtle tension, something that neither of them could completely ignore. The young woman, who had once been cautious and silent, was starting to express herself more openly, sometimes with a softness, sometimes with a quiet intensity that made him pause. He noticed it first in small things, the way she lingered a little longer in the kitchen when he was around, the way her eyes would meet his for a fleeting moment before she looked away, and the slight hesitations in her words, as if she was weighing them carefully before speaking. At first, he didn't think much of it. After all, they were living in close proximity, sharing meals, stories, and moments of quiet companionship. It was natural that familiarity would grow. But then came the moments that felt different, moments that carried a weight he hadn't expected. One afternoon, she approached him while he was tending to the small garden in the backyard. She stood quietly for a moment, watching him prune a plant before speaking. "I've never had a place to stay like this before," she said softly. Her voice was steady, but there was a subtle note of longing beneath it, Somewhere safe, somewhere I can be without fear. He looked up, meeting her gaze. There was honesty in her words, but also something more, something that made him feel both protective and uneasy. "I'm glad you feel safe here," he replied carefully. "You deserve to feel safe." She nodded but didn't step away. For a few moments, they simply stood together, the silence carrying an unspoken understanding. He realized that their relationship had begun to shift. It was no longer just about protection or secrecy. There was a new layer forming, a connection built on trust, companionship, and, unexpectedly, emotion. In the following days, this shift became more apparent. She began asking more personal questions, not just about his routines but about his life, his past, and even his thoughts. He found himself opening up in ways he hadn't anticipated, telling her stories of his childhood, his dreams, and the small regrets he carried with him. And she listened, not just as a guest, but as someone who genuinely cared about his words. At the same time, she started to reveal more about herself, though cautiously. She spoke of her travels, the hardships she had endured, and the loneliness that had driven her to seek refuge. There was an honesty in her stories, but also a subtle expectation, a sense that she wanted him to understand her not just as a person in need, but as someone whose life and choices mattered. He felt a growing sense of responsibility, not just for her safety but for her well-being in every sense. This closeness, however, brought challenges. They were still living in secrecy, and every day required careful attention. Any slip could have consequences. There were moments when she grew frustrated, wanting to go outside, wanting to interact with the world beyond the house. He could see the longing in her eyes, and he felt a pang of guilt. He explained gently that it wasn't safe yet, that they needed more time, and that he would do everything he could to protect her. She would nod, but the restlessness remained, a quiet reminder that their situation was fragile. One evening, while they were preparing dinner together, the tension between them became more tangible. She accidentally dropped a spoon, and as he bent down to pick it up, their hands brushed. It was a small, accidental touch, but it carried a weight neither could ignore. She looked at him quickly, a hint of a smile on her lips, but her eyes were serious, questioning. He cleared his throat and returned to the task, but his mind lingered on the moment. It was a subtle awakening, a realization that their bond was no longer purely about safety or survival. It was growing into something more complicated. Over time, their interactions began to carry an unspoken tension. Small gestures, a glance, a smile, a shared laugh started to hold deeper meaning. He noticed how she seemed to linger in his presence more than before, how her voice softened when speaking to him, and how she sought his attention, not out of necessity, but out of desire for connection. It was both flattering and unsettling, a reminder that human emotions could not be controlled, even in the most carefully managed situations. One rainy afternoon, she asked him to sit with her in the living room. The storm outside cast shadows across the room, creating an intimate, almost private atmosphere. She spoke of loneliness, not just the loneliness of being in danger, but the loneliness that came from being misunderstood, from being seen as fragile or dependent. Her words were calm, but the emotion behind them was clear. He listened, feeling both empathy and a subtle stir of something he had not expected, an awareness of the emotional depth between them. As the days passed, he began to notice a shift in her demeanor. She would occasionally tease him, light-heartedly questioning his habits or routines. She began to share small details about her life that went beyond survival, her favorite foods, little dreams she had, and the simple pleasures she missed. These moments brought warmth to the household, yet they also highlighted the tension beneath the surface. They were two people navigating an extraordinary situation, and the rules of normal life didn't fully apply. One evening she approached him with a question that caught him off guard. "Do you ever think about what would happen if someone knew I was here?" Her voice was calm, but her eyes searched his face for a reaction. He paused, considering how to answer. He wanted to be honest, but he also wanted to protect her feelings and the delicate balance they had created. "I think about it sometimes," he admitted carefully. "But I also know that right now, the important thing is that you're safe. We'll deal with the rest when the time comes." She nodded, but there was a lingering seriousness in her gaze. He realized that she was beginning to see him not just as a protector, but as someone who could play a more significant role in her life. This realization brought both responsibility and unease. He had never anticipated that their relationship could develop in such a complex way, and he felt the weight of it heavily. As the weeks continued, subtle changes in their behavior became more noticeable. She would linger longer during meals, her presence in the room more pronounced. He found himself thinking about her when he was away from the house, wondering how she was spending her time, what she was feeling, and whether she truly felt at home. It was a new and unfamiliar sensation, caring deeply for someone who was not only a guest but someone whose past and emotions were intertwined with his own life in unexpected ways. One evening, after a particularly long day, she spoke in a quiet, reflective tone. "I've never had someone care for me like this," she said. Her words were simple, yet carried a profound depth. He nodded, unsure how to respond, realizing that their bond had reached a level he hadn't anticipated. It was no longer just about secrecy or protection. It was about mutual respect, understanding, and emotional connection. The emotional shift also brought new challenges. He noticed that her expectations were growing, subtle but undeniable. She began to hint at desires and feelings that were more personal, more intimate, though never overtly stated. He felt the need to navigate these moments with care, understanding that emotional closeness could not be ignored, but also that boundaries were essential. They were both learning how to communicate in this unique, fragile environment, and mistakes could have serious consequences. During this time, he also reflected on his own feelings. He realized that he had grown attached to her, not just as someone in need of help, but as a person whose presence had enriched his life in unexpected ways. He found comfort in her laughter, in her quiet confidence, and in the moments of shared understanding that didn't require words. Yet, he also felt unease, knowing that the intensifying bond brought responsibilities he hadn't fully considered when he first offered her shelter. The tension between emotional closeness and the necessity of secrecy reached a subtle climax one afternoon. She had been sitting quietly, sketching in her notebook when she looked up and asked, "Do you think we will ever have to say goodbye?" Her question was simple, but it carried immense weight. He paused, considering how to answer. "I hope not," he said finally. "But whatever happens, I want you to know that you are valued and your safety and happiness matter to me." Her eyes softened, and for a brief moment the world outside seemed to vanish. In that quiet exchange, they both understood that their connection had shifted from mere survival to something deeper, something neither had anticipated. It was a delicate, unspoken agreement that they were now emotionally entwined, navigating a bond that carried both comfort and complexity. Life continued in this way, filled with quiet moments of laughter, shared meals, and subtle gestures of trust. Yet beneath the surface, the awareness of potential challenges loomed. They were building a relationship in secrecy, and the outside world remained unpredictable. Every day required careful attention, every interaction carried unspoken consequences, and every emotional shift demanded sensitivity and understanding. And so, as the days turned into weeks, they found themselves living in a delicate balance, connected by trust, strengthened by shared experiences, and aware of the unspoken tension that had begun to shape their lives. The bond between them was growing, complex and fragile, and both knew that the path ahead would require courage, patience, and honesty. The calm rhythm of their secret life had begun to change. The small house, once filled with quiet routines and careful habits, now held a different energy. The young woman had become more confident in her presence, and the bond between them, once fragile and cautious, had grown stronger and more complicated. They had spent weeks together, learning about each other's habits, fears, and dreams. But this closeness, as comforting as it was, also brought new challenges, and the tension in the house began to rise. One afternoon, she asked to talk with him alone in the living room. There was an unusual seriousness in her voice that made him pause. He nodded, gesturing for her to sit, and took a seat across from her. The sunlight coming through the window cast long shadows on the floor, and for a moment the room felt suspended, almost like the world outside no longer existed. "I need to tell you something," she began, her voice steady but her hands gripping the edge of the chair. He leaned forward slightly, signaling that he was listening. She took a deep breath and continued, "I've been thinking about us and what this means, about what we've shared and about the future." He felt a slight tightening in his chest. He had sensed that her feelings were shifting, but hearing her words out loud made it real, undeniable. He nodded slowly, trying to keep his expression calm. "I understand. Please go on." She looked down for a moment, then back at him. "I know that when I came here it was about safety, about shelter, but it has become more than that. For both of us, I think. And I need to be honest, I want something more. I want us to be connected completely, and that includes having a child. I want a family." The words hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. He felt a mixture of shock, confusion, and concern. He had never imagined that their bond, which had begun out of necessity and trust, would lead to such a direct demand. He sat quietly for a moment, letting the weight of her words settle, unsure how to respond. This was not a simple request. It was a life-changing statement, one that required careful thought, honesty, and reflection. I didn't expect this," he said finally, choosing his words carefully. "You've come to trust me, and I value that more than I can say, but having a child, that is a serious responsibility. It's not something to decide lightly, especially given our circumstances." She nodded, her expression calm but insistent. "I know it's serious. I'm not asking lightly. I trust you. I believe you can help me, support me, and I want us to face this together. I need to know if you're willing to be part of my life in every way." He leaned back, feeling the tension and responsibility pressing down on him. He cared deeply for her. He had grown attached to her presence, her strength, and her honesty. Yet the request was overwhelming. It was not just about him and her. It was about a life that would belong to both of them. He thought about the practicalities, the future, and the consequences of saying yes or no. It was a decision that could not be taken lightly, and he knew he had to be honest, both to her and to himself. "I need time to think," he said finally, his voice firm but gentle. "This is not something I can answer immediately. I care for you and I want to support you, but bringing a child into this world, it changes everything. We have to be certain it's the right choice." She studied him quietly, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded, accepting his words without argument. "I understand. I just needed you to know how I feel. I couldn't keep it inside any longer." Over the next few days, the atmosphere in the house shifted. The tension between them was subtle but constant. He moved through the rooms with careful thought, considering her words and their implications. She, in turn, seemed both patient and expectant, waiting for his response while continuing to live in the house with quiet confidence. Their routines continued, but there was a new awareness in every glance, every gesture, and every conversation. He found himself reflecting late at night, alone in the kitchen after she had gone to her room. He thought about the weeks they had spent together, the trust that had grown, the shared meals, the quiet conversations, and the laughter. He considered the strength she had shown, the resilience in her eyes, and the way she had opened up despite her fear and past struggles. And he realized that he had come to care for her in a way that went beyond simple protection. But caring was not enough. Responsibility required careful consideration, planning, and honesty. He thought about the future, how their lives would change, what challenges they would face, and how they could navigate a world that might not understand or accept their situation. He knew that saying yes would be a commitment for life, one that could not be reversed. And yet he also felt the weight of her trust, the vulnerability she had shown by sharing her feelings so openly. The next morning he approached her carefully. She was sitting by the window, the soft morning light illuminating her face. He sat beside her, taking a deep breath. "I've thought a lot about what you said," he began, "and I need to be honest with you. I care about you deeply, and I want to support you, whatever you decide. But I need to make sure that if we take this step, it is something we are both fully ready for. It's not just about us, it's about a life that would belong to both of us." She nodded slowly, listening intently. "I understand," she said. "I don't want to rush you, I just needed to speak my truth. I needed you to know what I want." For the next few days, they continued to live together, each navigating the delicate balance between emotional closeness and practical consideration. They shared meals, laughed quietly at small jokes, and moved through their routines with a heightened awareness of each other. The house, once a place of simple shelter, had become a space where decisions about the future were being carefully considered. One afternoon, they went for a walk in the nearby woods, a rare moment outside their secretive home. The fresh air, the sound of birds, and the sunlight filtering through the trees created a peaceful backdrop for their conversation. She spoke about her hopes for the future, about the family she dreamed of, and about the life she wished to create. He listened, understanding the depth of her desires, and reflected on his own capacity to meet those expectations. "I want to be part of your life," he said finally, after a long silence. "But we have to be honest about the challenges. We have to prepare, plan, and understand that this decision will change everything. If we do this, we do it together, fully aware of the responsibility." She looked at him, her eyes soft but determined. "I want that. I want to face it together. I trust you and I believe we can make it work, but I needed to tell you how I feel, even if it's difficult. I couldn't stay silent any longer." Their conversation marked a turning point. It was not a resolution, but it was a moment of honesty, where both acknowledged their feelings, fears, and expectations. They were no longer merely two people sharing a secret. They were two individuals navigating a complex emotional bond, considering the weight of decisions that could shape the rest of their lives. Returning to the house, they continued to build their connection carefully. Small gestures of trust, understanding, and support became more frequent. She began to share more about her past, her dreams, and the life she hoped to build. He, in turn, offered reassurance, guidance, and honesty, ensuring that every decision they considered was thoughtful and deliberate. Even with this new understanding, the tension was never fully gone. Every interaction carried weight, every decision was considered carefully, and the awareness of potential consequences remained. Yet, amidst this tension, there was also a growing sense of hope. They had faced the most difficult conversations openly and honestly, creating a foundation that could support the challenges to come. Nights in the house were quiet but reflective. They often sat together, talking softly about their hopes, fears, and the possibilities ahead. Sometimes they would simply sit in silence, appreciating the presence of the other and the comfort it brought. The bond between them had grown stronger, shaped by shared experiences, honesty, and the understanding that every choice carried significance. As the days passed, they moved forward carefully, navigating the delicate path between emotional closeness and practical responsibility. The woman's feelings were clear, and he had acknowledged them thoughtfully. They had reached a stage where honesty and reflection guided their decisions, preparing them for the next chapter of their lives, whatever it might bring. And so, the house, once a place of secrecy and caution, had transformed into a space of honest reflection, emotional growth, and careful preparation. They had faced a confrontation that could have torn them apart, but instead, it became a moment of clarity, where both understood the depth of their connection and the responsibility they now shared. The journey ahead would be difficult, but they were beginning to face it together, with honesty, patience, and a mutual understanding of the life-changing choices before them. The days following their serious conversation passed with a quiet intensity. The air in the house was filled with reflection and careful consideration. They had confronted the truth, faced their emotions honestly, and now both needed time to process the weight of the choices ahead. Though the tension remained, it was tempered by understanding, respect, and a growing sense of shared responsibility. Life in secrecy had transformed into life with awareness, and every action now carried new meaning. The man spent much of his time thinking about the future. He considered the responsibilities involved, the life they might build together, and the challenges they would face as a team. It was a lot to take in, and at times he felt overwhelmed. Yet he also realized that he could no longer deny the attachment he felt toward the young woman. She had become an integral part of his life, not just as someone he protected, but as someone whose presence brought him comfort, joy, and purpose. Meanwhile, she moved through the house with a calm confidence. She had grown accustomed to their routines, and yet there was a lightness in her step, a quiet hopefulness that reflected her belief in the possibility of a shared future. She respected his need for reflection and space, and she, too, considered what their next steps would mean for both of them. Their silent understanding had become a strong, unspoken bond, one that gave them courage to face the unknown together. One morning, the man decided to take a walk to clear his mind. He walked through the familiar streets of the town, observing neighbors, families, and the rhythm of daily life. He noticed the simplicity of it, the routines, the small gestures of kindness that defined ordinary living. And as he walked, he reflected on how extraordinary his own life had become. The presence of the young woman had introduced challenges, yes, but also a depth of connection he had never experienced before. When he returned home, he found her in the garden, tending to the small plants they had been caring for together. The sunlight highlighted the gentle determination in her movements, and he felt a surge of admiration. She had faced hardships that he could barely imagine, and yet she approached life with resilience and hope. He realized that this was a foundation they could build upon, not just for themselves, but for the future they were beginning to imagine together. He sat beside her quietly, and for a moment, neither spoke. The soft breeze carried the scent of flowers and soil, a simple reminder of life's persistence even in challenging circumstances. Finally, he spoke. "I've thought a lot about us," he said softly. "About what you said and what it means for the future." She looked up, attentive and calm, waiting for him to continue. "I care for you deeply," he admitted. "I want to support you, and I want to build something meaningful with you, but I also know this is a serious commitment. It's not just about us, it's about a life that will belong to both of us. We need to be ready, prepared, and fully aware of the responsibilities ahead." She smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting a mixture of relief and hope. "I understand, and I want to face it with you together. Whatever it takes." The days that followed were filled with planning, reflection, and small steps toward building trust and understanding. They discussed the practicalities, how to care for themselves, how to prepare for potential challenges, and how to ensure that any decisions they made were thoughtful and responsible. It was a slow process, filled with careful conversations, quiet observations, and moments of shared laughter that lightened the intensity of their planning. Through this process, they discovered more about each other. She revealed small dreams she had for the future, a simple home with space for a garden, a life surrounded by community, and the freedom to move and create without fear. He shared his own hopes about stability, kindness, and building a life rooted in honesty and respect. Each conversation strengthened their bond, allowing them to understand the depth of their connection and the importance of mutual support. One evening, after a long day of reflection and discussion, they sat together in the living room. The sky outside was painted in shades of gold and violet, and the house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards. She leaned slightly toward him, her voice soft but confident. "I've never had someone trust me and care for me like this before. It makes me believe in the possibility of a life I never thought I could have." He looked at her, his heart warmed by her words. "And I've never had someone teach me so much about patience, understanding, and courage. You've changed my life in ways I can't fully explain." In the following weeks, they continued to navigate their shared life with growing confidence. The house, once a place of secrecy and caution, had transformed into a home filled with understanding, shared responsibilities, and careful optimism. They worked together in the kitchen, tended the garden, and spent quiet evenings reflecting on their journey. Their conversations were honest and thoughtful, addressing both fears and hopes for the future. Despite the progress, challenges remained. The world outside was unpredictable, and the secrecy of their arrangement meant that they had to continue to be cautious. Yet, they approached each challenge with a new sense of partnership. They had learned to communicate openly, to respect boundaries, and to support each other without judgment. This mutual understanding became the cornerstone of their relationship, allowing them to face difficulties with confidence and compassion. One day, she asked if they could plan for the possibility of having a family. It was a delicate conversation, filled with both hope and caution. They discussed what it would mean to prepare for a child, the responsibilities involved, and the ways they could ensure a safe, nurturing environment. He was thoughtful, careful, and honest in his responses, emphasizing the importance of readiness and mutual commitment. She listened attentively, appreciating his consideration and understanding. Their discussions continued over days, each conversation bringing clarity and shared purpose. They began to envision a future together, not just as two people in secrecy, but as partners capable of building a life grounded in trust, respect, and shared responsibility. Every step they took, every decision they considered, was guided by a deep awareness of the importance of honesty and the value of thoughtful planning. As the weeks turned into months, the bond between them strengthened further. They had faced fear, uncertainty, and emotional challenges together, and each experience had deepened their connection. She had grown to trust him fully, relying on his support and valuing his guidance. He had come to care for her profoundly, recognizing her strength, intelligence, and resilience. Together, they were learning how to navigate life with honesty, respect, and patience. Even amidst the routine of daily life, moments of quiet joy emerged. They would sit together in the garden, watching the sunset, sharing stories, or simply enjoying the presence of one another. These moments became anchors, reminders that even in a life once defined by secrecy and fear, there was room for peace, happiness, and hope. One evening, as they prepared a simple dinner together, she looked at him and said softly, "I feel like we've come a long way. From the first day you offered me shelter to now, it feels like we're building something real, something lasting." He smiled, feeling the truth in her words. "We are, and I want us to continue building it carefully and together. Whatever challenges come, we face them as a team." In this way, their life continued, marked by small victories, careful planning, and a growing sense of partnership. They had navigated secrecy, confronted emotional truths, and begun to envision a future together. The house, once a place of caution and tension, had become a home filled with hope, understanding, and quiet determination. As the story drew to a close, they found themselves reflecting on the journey they had taken. They had faced challenges that tested patience, honesty, and emotional resilience. They had learned to communicate openly, to respect boundaries, and to value trust above all else. And in the process, They had built a bond that would guide them into the future, a bond defined by care, respect, and a shared commitment to life and possibility. The man realized that offering shelter had led to something far greater than he had anticipated. He had discovered the power of trust, the importance of patience, and the depth of connection that could form even in extraordinary circumstances. The young woman had